Good morning and welcome to a very special interview show of the Pro. Today it's my pleasure to have Lieutenant General Dushyant Singh Sir on our show. Sir is here with us to discuss the peace and security challenges in South Asia and the way forward. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out the time and speaking to us, and a very warm welcome to the Pro.
Thank you.
Sir, I would like to start the discussion with the Afghanistan situation. What is your assessment of the whole scenario at the macro level?
Well, Ritvish, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to your portal. Very good morning to all the listeners. Uh, as far as your question about Afghanistan's current situation is concerned, let me give you a little preamble. Uh, if you look at Afghanistan today, it's in a state of chaos and confusion, right? If I were to use four words to describe Afghanistan, that would be vulnerable, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I will dilate on each one of them one by one. First, look at the vulnerability part of it. You see, the moment the Americans and the NATO forces left Afghanistan, there was a vacuum, and the vacuum had to be filled either by the forces led by the Ghani government or Taliban, one of the two. Uh, Taliban was quicker to take the initiative. It is trying to fill this vacuum. Now, when you suck the wind out of a system, it takes time for it to stabilize. So, as of now, Taliban is in a state of flux. Taliban itself is divided into three, four major factions. You have the Doha group led by Biradar. You have the Kandahar group led by Akhundzada and the Mullah Omar's son Muhammad Yaqub. Then you have the Haqqani network, which is the more
Yeah.
prominent of all, which is actually ruling the roost today, essentially because it is backed by the Pakistan's deep state ISI. And you found also that the government could only be formed once the DGISI had visited Afghanistan and had got hold of uh, prized positions for Haqqani network, like the Interior Ministry, which is the most important thing, control of Kabul. The faction which controls Kabul controls Afghanistan. That's the way you say things in political circles. So that has gone to Sirajuddin Haqqani. So what I'm saying is that there are groups within a group. This is at the political level. Then vulnerability part comes up in terms of its women and children. They are highly vulnerable. The minorities, you would have seen recently the Sikh Gurdwara also being ransacked by the Taliban, not really Taliban, ISIS forces. Then the other minorities, the Hindus, are trying to get out of that place. We are exactly not sure as to how many are left behind also. So these are the and all those people who are aligned towards the American forces, or who are aligned with the so-called democratic forces. They are all under a state of vulnerability. They are not sure of their future. They have not been able to get out of Afghanistan. Many tried to go out of Afghanistan. So this is the vulnerable part of it. Then you come to uncertainty. Now, uncertainty in terms of where is the political direction going to be. There are external forces working on Afghanistan, which is in the form of China and Pakistan trying to establish their control in Afghanistan. Then you have the Russians, Iranians, and the Central Asian republics all looking to secure their own personal interests and trying to influence Afghanistan's current regime. And then you have the superpower America as also the fringe elements. I would say India is as of now in a ringside view. Okay, we are not really into what Afghanistan is going through, but we are trying to influence it through third parties, right? Through Qatar, UAE, and other influences, Russia, for example, and even America. So therefore, there are so many factors which are now playing in Afghanistan besides the internal factors like the northern resistance. Where is it now? I believe it is regrouping in Tajikistan, and Tajikistan is trying to support the NRF. Then you have the internal opposition to the Taliban in terms of ISIS. ISIS, as you know, is against the Taliban for reasons which I will dwell upon later in your subsequent discussions. So this is the uncertain part. How is it all going to settle down? So as of now, we are looking at things to settle down in Afghanistan. And in this, there is a huge amount of uncertainty. Then you come to complexities. Look at the multiple number of players. There is no, there's a cash crunch in Afghanistan. People are dying of hunger because the assets have been frozen by the US when they left. The entire cash flow has been frozen by the United States. The country needs these kind of assets and resources to look after their public.
Even the Google accounts are freezed by the Google and Microsoft.
Everything. So do you think Afghanistan will survive on drug money, crime money? We have had recently a haul of almost 3,000 kgs of heroin at Mundra port, which is run by Adani, and Adani has now decided not to take any consignment coming from Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, basically for this reason. So what has happened? Their cost of transportation of goods will go further up, or taking goods from India or whichever place. Everything is adding up to the problems of Afghanistan. So complexity is also huge. And all these four, if you look at it and then see Afghanistan, it looks like an ambiguous situation. So therefore, what we call it as VUCA is the correct description of Afghanistan as of today. We need to let the dust fall. It's like the cyclone. As and when it starts settling down, you will see the dust falling and you will see how the dice is rolling. Okay. So as of now, I think we have to wait and watch which side the dice turns.
Okay. So why is it so? Yeah. Why is it so, sir, that India hasn't taken any proper side?
Look, for India, you can put a little bit of blame on India to say that we put all our eggs in the one basket, that is the ANDSF and the Ghani government, and also basically the pro-democratic forces led by the Americans. Secondly, that we did not have a back channel going with the possibility of Taliban coming into power in the future. We didn't have a hedging strategy to say. So for the future, should the events take a turn not in favor of India, India almost pumped in $3 billion into Afghanistan in terms of infrastructure, road building, dams. Then also the parliament was constructed by India. A huge library was constructed by India. India really put in a lot of resources in it. But there is a little, I would say, this is not the whole truth. To say that we did not have a back channel going, I think may be incorrect, because the foreign policy always looks at all the angles. The fact that we were able to successfully evacuate all our critical assets and people from Afghanistan in a timely manner is because of our back channel discussions via Qatar. When we realized that India is not being included in the new peace accord which happened at Doha in with Taliban and America. In fact, the Americans excluded Ghani also from that accord. So therefore, at that point in time, I think somewhere India did start making amends and started building bridges with Qatar. And that is because of that, in the second round, when Doha talks were going on, India was invited for those talks. So therefore, there was some building of bridges. But to say if we will intervene by boots on ground, I think that has never been our policy. So unfortunately, fortunately, we have had a bitter experience in Sri Lanka by putting our boots on ground. So therefore, somewhere behind our back, we are always putting boots on ground in a country without quote unquote UN charter, right? If there was a UN charter in this, we would have probably been willing to go with our boots also in Afghanistan.
Okay. So why is it so that the Indian government didn't interfere in the whole Taliban takeover? What are your thoughts on this?
Uh, Ritviz, this has been a very common question asked by many as to why did India not intervene or was not proactive in assessing the future events and the likelihood of change of regimes. First of all, let me accept this fact that yes, India did put all its eggs in one basket, which was basically the forces led by the Americans and the ANDSF, the Afghan Democratic Government, because the core value of India has been always to support a democratic formation, right? Elected by its people. But at the same time, realpolitik demands that we must keep our options open for any future turn of events. To that extent, I think we were found wanting. But to say that India possibly did not have back channel talks going with the Taliban or third party talks would be slightly incorrect in the sense that when we found that we were being excluded from the peace talks in Doha, in fact, as you know, even the Afghan government of that time, led by Ghani, was not included in the Doha talks. The Americans were talking directly to Taliban. So we did then start approaching Qatar government, and then thereafter you found that very recently when we were trying to have a peace talk again revived in Doha, we were called by the Qatar government. So to that extent, I think we did start a little late, and it is because of this third party approach, as also our relations with the Americans and the Iranians, we were able to actually uh, evacuate most of our people from Afghanistan, most of our consulates from Afghanistan, and also the Kabul embassy staff was evacuated. Now Kabul embassy is being looked after by the local staff. The situation is slightly uncertain in the sense that we are not very sure exactly how many Indians are still left. But by and large, I think the government has got hold of the situation, and the Indian interests have been taken care within the constraints of a government like Taliban. So I would say yes and no to your answer. That yes, initially we did put all our eggs in the same one basket, but later on, I think we have recovered from it, and I think we will go ahead on this path. But we have to wait and watch. We have to see the intentions of Taliban government. Taliban government, as of now, doesn't look inclusive. It is heavily dominated by Pashtuns, and in that, heavily dominated by the Haqqanis, which is not a true representative of Afghanistan. So India will be very, very wary of recognizing such a government because it will definitely not be in the interest of India.
Okay, sir. So coming to terrorism, how big of a threat does the terrorist outfits based in Afghanistan be for India's national security? What are your views on it?
A lot of people have predicted that because the Afghanistan situation is now slightly coming under control. Taliban is now engaged in governance, so therefore their cadres would most of them would get sucked into administration and governance of the country. Also, maybe part of their key security establishments. So therefore, there would be these foreign fighters who came, or foreign militants, terrorists who came to Afghanistan to liberate Afghanistan from the far enemy, as they call them, would become free and would start looking for alternate battlegrounds, and which is the most likely nearest battleground, that's Kashmir, right? So therefore, a natural tendency would be for these groups to be exploited by the ISI and to be sent towards Kashmir or even in the hinterland of India, and also into areas which are sensitive from the point of view of religious differences. I'm referring to the places like UP, etc., where there is a large amount of Muslim population, which remains slightly at loggerheads on issues which are like, Babri, I would say Babri Masjid, or Kashi temples, or Vrindavan issues, etc. So therefore, they would try to exploit these differences. But if you do a very critical analysis, who are these groups which are going to be free? First of all, it is the ISISK, which is the uh, Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, Khorasan province group. Now, what was Khorasan? Khorasan was an area extending from Kazakhstan. I mean, it is as per their ancient history. Khorasan province was named as an area of the caliphate, right? The caliphate which you are aware of, extending from Kazakhstan to Sri Lanka and Maldives, and also parts of Iran. Essentially, this is a group which is trying to establish its influence over the old caliphate, eastern part of the old caliphate, which also includes India. But their enemy is even Taliban, because as per them, Taliban is hobnobbing with the Americans, and Americans, they do not like their throughout the ideology and philosophy has been to oppose America, because they attribute all the cultural, as per them. I'm not talking in general terms, but as per their ideology, the cultural aberrations which are taking place in the Islamic world is all because of the westernization, and in westernization, primarily the United States of America. Taliban, having approached America for governance, is hated by the ISKP. So ISKP will remain involved in fighting the Taliban, as you would have seen the August attack, 15th August attack, which took place, in which 13 American soldiers and 180 odd Afghanis lost their life. Recently, there was an attack in Kabul mosque. Then, so therefore, these guys are going to continue to remain at war with Taliban. So not many from ISIS KP would get freed for alternate backgrounds, especially battlegrounds, especially India, etc. Then you have the TTP. Now TTP itself is involved in fighting the Pakistanis. Then you have the ETIMs. Now ETIM is a East Turkmenistan militant group, which is basically fighting for the independence of Xinjiang Uyghur province against China. So all these groups have their internal they have their internal goals and objectives. But you cannot rule out the militants who had joined these groups from India, some of them from Kerala, basically, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc., going back again and creating problems. So I assess not more than about 1,000 odd terrorists is what may get freed from Afghanistan and could be applied against India. And in that, my sense is more than Kashmir, the Indo-Nepal border and the borders along Bangladesh will be used more by these groups. For your information, the Indo-Nepal border, we have almost 3.5 crore Muslims living in UP. And if you combine Bihar and West Bengal, this figure goes to about 7.6 crores. There are 2,500 madrasas as per the SSB, the Sima Sahastra Bal, which is the border force guarding, in 2008. So now it's 2021. So these 2,500 figures along the border would have increased at least 1.5 times, right? Similarly, on the Nepal side, there are about 800 madrasas in 2008. Now their numbers would have gone up. Now with the China-Pak collusivity, there are a large number of study centers which have come up along the Indo-Nepal border. Then you have also places like Gorakhpur, Faizabad, Varanasi being converted into hubs of terrorists by the Pakistan ISI. Or there is also a report of a guest house having been constructed along the Indo-Nepal border in the UP area on the Nepali side, which is called as DEL, Dawat-e-Islamia, which is basically a guest house for staying for personnel of Bangladesh, Pakistan, these people who are transiting. Now, this can very easily be used by the militants as launching pads. So, such like institutions are coming along the Indo-Nepal border, and Indo-Nepal border it has got 1415 kilometers or 1700 odd kilometers of border with 26 crossing points. It's a very porous border with no passports, etc. So therefore, this to me appears to be the next area. And with the Chinese collusivity, with what happened in Barahoti very recently, there were 100 odd troops which tried to cross over, did some damage to our infrastructure and went back. So these multiple factors and the availability of very sensitive targets such as Ayodhya and Varanasi and Vrindavan, to me looks like we could have a serious attempt being made along this frontier besides the Kashmir issue which will be there. So these two areas, I think we should be careful. Kashmir, we might see influx, as you have seen, some targeted killings have already taken place in Kashmir also. So there would be threat, but not that which India cannot deal with. I think the Indian forces security forces are capable of dealing with these threats, and so we should not get unduly bothered about it. Right? There
Yeah.
will be an enhancement in threat levels, but that's it. That's it. India is not Afghanistan. I mean, let's put it very bluntly. We are a very, very professional defense forces, and we have very good security forces looking after our internal security.
Okay, sir. So you talked about Kashmir, now coming to and Afghanistan, now coming to China. So, sir, coming to the maritime security challenges, how do you see China's aggression in the South China Sea, and what will be its impact on India? Because it's the another very important geostrategic thing.
How do you define China's strategy in South China Sea and India? For this, you must understand its intent. What is its intent? Everything flows from the intent of a country. The intent of Chinese is very clear, right from Deng Xiaoping when he started the reformation of their economy way back in the 80s to date, is to become a superpower by 2049, which is 100th year of completion of Chinese Communist Party or independence of China. Not independence of China. 1949 they got the independence. So in 2049 they want to emerge as a world superpower. I'm not saying they may replace America, but they should be counted as a world superpower. They are progressing towards that in a very, very healthy manner.
Events
Right? There are some
events are their navy are the number one in the world right now.
absolutely in terms of numbers, yes, but in terms of quality and technology, I think the Americans still are ahead of them. So let's numbers are only one of the indicators of superiority of a force. There are many other issues which go into deciding whether a particular military power is better or not that better as compared to the other factors. What I'm trying to say is that the intent at the global level is to emerge as a world power, and intent at the regional level is to ensure that India doesn't threaten there. So at the regional level, they are looking at India as an adversary. If this is the intent, where are the challenges for China? It is in the South China Sea. It is in the border regions along the India-China border. Now, at both these places, it is flip-flopping. Sometimes it becomes active in the South China Sea. Sometimes it becomes active along the Indian borders. So it is not letting both of them rest in peace. What is the strategy which it is employing for this? It has four pillars. Firstly is the brinkmanship. Why I am saying brinkmanship is it does not want to get involved in a conflict, right? Either with the Americans or with the Indians, because it will pull down their economy quite drastically. As such, you would have heard that their economy is in doldrums. In fact, their external loans are around $385 billion, which is off the record. On the record, loans are $5 trillion. By this loan, I mean it has given this much of loan to the others. Now, there is a danger in this. I have given you 3,000 rupees, right? Tomorrow you come and ask me, I want back my 3,000 rupees. Suppose I say no. What happens? The bulk of the money of 5 trillion it is actually owing to Americans. Americans are a more superior military power. I will narrate an anecdote. I was in America, and one of my professors in the postgraduate class which I was taking there, he happened to be ex CIA CIA senior official, and he was now after retirement taking classes on deterrence. Bob O'Connell was his name. So I asked him that time the loans, external debt of America was about 2 trillion or something. So I said, suppose if the Chinese demand this money from you, what will you do? He said, we will not pay. That was a very simple one-line answer. I know he said it more as a kind of a symbolic thing, because in international transactions you have to honor each other's commitments. But still, that option is there with Americans. The other balance of the money which it has given to countries which are absolutely third world countries. Laos, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, African countries. It has been dishing out this money to them in the hope that if they are not able to pay, they will take control of real estate of this. For example, in Sri Lanka, they have taken Hambantota. So likewise, they have given the loans with the aim of securing their presence there. But ultimately, cash is required. And today they are facing this problem. The Chinese are basically doing this brinkmanship warfare to ensure that they are not economically pushed back. So they will take you to that level, but withdraw. Whether it is along our borders or whether it is in the South China Sea, you would have seen they will do some action. They will show aerial intervention into Taiwan Strait, but then that's it. It's just a method of keeping the situation alive, brinkmanship, as you say, and fall back thereafter. Right? Keep the opponents always guessing and always in tenterhooks. The second thing is land mafia. Whether it is along the Indian border, they call it as salami slicing. They will encroach two, come back one. So they will encroach 2 steps and come back 1 step. So they will make you feel as though we have done a great thing by having an agreement and we are coming back. Like for example, Kailash Parvat, Kailash ranges. When we withdrew, actually we withdrew from our own country or our own perception of the LAC. They also went back, but they have now made their position fixed up to that. So what I'm trying to say, from Gogra and Hot Spring, etc., they are still there. They are still camping on opposite us. So they have done a 1 step back, but they continue to stay along the Hot Spring and PP15 area. The recent talks have failed. The 13th round Corps Commander level talks have failed. So land mafia is a big game which they are playing. In South China Sea, what they're doing? They are using the fishing militia. They are going and camping near a group of islands. Slowly, they will start enhancing that island by artificial dumping. And then artificial islands are being created. They have created a Sensa city in South China Sea, which, as per my information, this Sensa city comprises of number of these islands, Paracel Islands, etc., Spratly Islands, and its area is almost 800,000 square mile city. This is as per US Naval War College report by Zachary Haber. Tourism is being encouraged in Paracel. Industries in aquaculture is being encouraged for long-term residency. People are being encouraged to go and stay there. They are setting up civilians as part of military-civil fusion to govern the contested areas. What I'm trying to say is that these are contested areas, but once they put the Chinese there as a normal resident, slowly it will become part of their ownership. Why are they doing it? They're doing it for two things. One, to ensure dominance of the South China Sea and the Malacca Strait, right? To ensure free flow of energy. Why? 80% of the Chinese oil goes through this particular strait. 64% of all trade goes through this. Some people say that China is doing the string of pearls strategy, actually China is the one which is choked, not India. China is trying to get out of it. It is China which is landlocked, not India. India is absolutely free in the south. We have a 1,500-kilometer Indian Ocean basin with us. We are among the 6 countries which can explore sea minerals. We have that capability. Our oceans are free. The British ruled the world from India. Why can't we do that? India is a free country, not China. Chinese are landlocked. They are trying to create an alternative to Malacca via the CPEC, via the CMEC, via Iran, Afghanistan, Iran, Central Asian Republic, via the Russian and Central Asian republics. They are trying to get out, somehow get their trade as an alternate route. They are trying to go through the East China Sea, through the Northern Hemisphere. That route hasn't come up as yet. But as and when it comes up, the Russians are working on it. Then that will be an alternate route to South China Sea. It is the Chinese which are worried about their energy requirements. Today, there are power shortages in China,
Yeah.
So South China Sea, these are the two major things: land mafia, brinkmanship, and economic warfare. Economic warfare is the debt strategy.
Yeah.
You give so much of debt to a person, to a country, that ultimately it gives you a real estate in return. So that is how they're extending the zone.
Okay, so coming to the trade, how can China impact the global trade? Because most of the companies are headquartered in China, specifically in smartphone sector. So how can China impact global trade?
Till about 2 years back, China was indispensable to many of the countries. Thanks to COVID, I would say. Thanks to COVID, and the fact that, in fact, there are reports that actually the COVID came in much before November also, November 2020, November 19 also. Somewhere in May 19, probably the COVID had come up in China. Because of COVID, the international companies, the multinationals, have started looking for alternate locations. The second thing which has happened is that the Chinese industry is taking a beating because of ban on the Australian coal. The Australian coal is lying on the Chinese port, but they have rejected it because the Australians had opposed the Chinese and blamed them for origin of COVID. Okay, so because of lack of coal, their thermal power production has gone down. Their cities are now seeing blackouts. They are closing down their aluminum industry, iron industry, soya crushing industries. So many industries are closing down rapidly. So what is happening is the world has started for rare earth material elsewhere, which was earlier the domain of China. So the Chinese definitely have a great influence over the countries are trying to get out of the Chinese shackles. My view is that China will continue to remain engaged as far as economic trade is concerned for a while till the others do not find an alternative. But slowly and steadily, I think they will be able to find an alternative. And the Chinese are going to see some tough times ahead. Reasons: South China Sea, it's not easy for Chinese to dictate terms. America has a permanent presence. Australia has a permanent presence. They have a smart and a good navy. The UK, by virtue of the AUKUS agreement, have gone into the South China Sea. India has a considerable influence in South China Sea, not to that extent, but yes, through the Malabar exercise with Japan, Australia, and India. Although it's not an operational or it's not a warlike alignment, it is just I would say it's a training exercise. But they do have advantages. Interoperability between these navies has increased. Indian military power, maritime power is slowly increasing. We are also going in for nuclear submarines. We are about to. We have the triad, not as strong as the other countries are concerned, but our triad is in place. So therefore, we do have some deterrence capabilities, both as far as nuclear is concerned and a non-nuclear in the conventional domain also. So therefore, it will not be easy for the Chinese to really influence in a detrimental way the trade with the other countries. It will reduce, but not to the extent that India or the other countries will not be able to find alternate sources for themselves. Mother,
Okay, sir.
invention, necessity is mother of invention.
Yeah.
So this is what is
Okay.
going to happen to us.
Yeah. So I would like to conclude by my discussion by asking that how can India and China work towards establishing peace in the region? Because that is something which is very much lacking, especially from the Chinese side.
This is a one question. In fact, our country is heavily in favor of number of experts are in favor of cooperation with China to ensure that our economy continues to grow and we continue to strengthen our military power. Because if economy grows, your military power will grow. If your military power will grow, people will listen to you. You see, power respects power, and the Chinese are very much into this kind of a dynamics. If there is a powerful country opposite the Chinese, they will listen to it. As of now, they feel that India is a runover, right? So they tend to ignore India. They will not be able to do so in case if the military power is also of a very, we are not a military power actually. We are actually military force. We have a long way to go to become a military power. Military power means we should be able to project to places beyond our shores, which we are not in the current situation. So, uh, how should India and China cooperate? We need to build on our economic growth. We need to build on our military capabilities. How do we build on our military capabilities? We are far behind the Chinese. The Chinese today have a 14, 15 trillion economy, and we have just barely 3 trillion economy. In fact, the external loans of China are double that of our GDP. So we need to do a smart development of our military power. And by that, what I mean is we need to focus on indigenization. We need to focus on the niche technologies such as artificial intelligence, drones, robotics, cyber, information. These are the domains where we need to actually be at par with the Chinese, because these are the instruments of war of the future. So therefore, if we build on our smart power, we should be able to look or match the Chinese and not be looking at catching up with a 15 trillion economy. It is beyond our capabilities as of today. But at the same time, we should ensure that we are economically independent of China and get keyed in to the rest of the world economy with the EU, with the ASEAN countries, and with the other Western countries like America and the Russia. We should not forget, and the Russian strategic partnership is very important for us, and I think we need to continue to build on it. Also, we should retain our strategic autonomy to go into any kind of an agreement with any country if it suits our requirements. And I'm referring to Iran here. I think this is the only way that we can ensure peace and stability as far as India and China are concerned. We need to
Yeah.
increase our power, we need to increase our economic power, then only, and have smart diplomacy going around to cover our weaknesses till we develop them, or till we build our bridges as far as they are concerned.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out the time and speaking to us. And thank you so much for your insightful thoughts. Thank you.